So I've just come up to the Bald Hill Estate and it's a lovely crisp winter afternoon. It's pretty cold actually, there's still quite a bit of frost on the ground here. And I thought it would be a good idea. I'm just walking over the back here where there's some lovely oak trees, and hopefully with the sun just going down, it'll give me some great inspiration for a painting. Certainly a festive painting. So let's go and have a look. Let's see what the light's doing. Let's see what the trees are looking like. They always look magnificent at this time of year, so I think it's going to be a good thing to make a painting of. Now I know we've talked about this before, but this really is the essence of landscape painting for me. I've come out here, it's cold, I haven't really got time to do any painting. In fact, I'm not entirely sure that my water wouldn't freeze up, it's pretty cold. But the whole point is I'm here and I can see the light, I can see how it's working with the landscape. I'm looking at this magnificent tree, I'm just getting a bit of detail down here with a pencil and a sketch pad. And I don't need to make a painting. All I'm trying to do is get a combination of shapes in the right place. I've been here so many times, I understand this light and I know what it's going to look like. I can use reference photos as well. But it means you can get out into the landscape with just a small amount of kit and do a quick bit of sketching. Don't weigh yourself down with expensive easels and things that can have their place, but really they're not going to contribute anything this evening other than making me very cold and very unhappy, carting huge amounts of kit everywhere. So yes, I just want to get a very quick impression of the landscape, that's all I need. The fact that I've been here, I've heard the pheasants, I've heard the crunchy grass, that's all I need. I can take this sketch back into the studio, which is what we're going to do, and make a nice seasonal wintry painting from it. So that's quite enough. I'm going to go and stick the kettle on, have a mince pie, and then let's start painting. Well, this is the sketch that I did while I was outdoors. I've just added a couple of colour notes to the top there, and it's going to be a simple painting, so let's keep things simple with the palette. Cobalt blue, burnt umber, yellow ochre, and permanent rose. That's going to give me plenty to work from, and I'll be able to achieve all the colours that I need for this particular painting. With the sketch, I've just opened up a gap here in the fence. If I'd have had a fence all the way along, it would have just been too much of a barrier for the eye to overcome and would have sort of prevented us from moving through the landscape. So we've taken a little bit of the fence out, which as artists we're allowed to do, and that gives us access to the main oak tree, which is the focal point of the painting. In this particular area of the landscape, and you can see this from the reference photograph, there wasn't too much frost left on the ground here, but I want to include some of that, so I'm going to have some frost coming across here, and that's it really. It's nice and simple. It's all about this magnificent oak tree. Okay, so I've sketched the scene out very quickly on this nice piece of Langton Prestige rough surface paper. There's not as much detail and information as there is in the sketch that I made outdoors, but I don't need that. Simply a suggestion of where the main limbs of the tree are, the fence, and that's about it really. First job, let's get the sky done. Now I've wet the paper and I'm going to start off at the bottom with this nice mix of yellow ochre, a little bit of permanent rose in there as well, just to warm it up. Stronger near the horizon. I'm going to come back to this corner because it was quite intense. There was quite a nice warm glow there and I want to get that into the scene. I'm now painting into a warm grey. As I come up the paper, my board's flat here, so it allows me to manage this wet wash. You can see that I'm using a nice large brush here. That helps to get a nice soft transition. Now I'm going to come into some blue, allow that to merge down into the grey, and then finish off at the top with a stronger wash of the blue. And all this is merging together, grey down into the yellow. I'm just going to make the blue a little bit stronger on this side of the painting because the light's coming from the left-hand side, and so I want a little more strength of colour over here. On this side, of course, the sun is bleaching out the colour in the sky. And then as this is drying up, I'm just going to add a little bit more warmth to the bottom of the sky in the left-hand corner here. There really was quite a nice glow there, and I want to capture that. That's it. Now as this is starting to dry, I'm just going to paint in the hills in the distance here, and I want these to have a soft edge to the top of them. They really are quite distant, and I don't want to have a hard edge there, and so putting them in now as the sky is just coming to the point where it's almost too dry to work, I'll drop it in. I'll allow it to run out into the area of field, and I've got myself a nice soft area of background hills. Damp brush across the top just blends that in, helps to define that shape. And I'm not finished here yet. I'm going to suggest in some distant trees that aren't there, but they just help to balance things up a little bit. Then perhaps something in the corner here. That's nice, that gives me something to come back to and something to work with later. Now I'm just going to let all that dry up. Right, let's just drop in some distant trees here, and I've got quite a nice warm colour here, and it's warmer than it is in the reference photo, but I just recall the sun sort of attempting to break its way through the trees here, and I just want to capture a hint of that. So just a little bit of this nice warm colour here. I'm leaving some gaps there to suggest little holes and apertures in the trees, or the mass of branches, I suppose, more than anything. And I'm just changing up the colours here into some warm greys, some sort of shadowy blue colours, keeping it nice and wet, so I've got this area to work with. And I'm going over the top of this area of the oak tree here. It's a lot darker, those branches, so there's no problem there. I think we'll just finish up here on this side of the main trunk. I'll paint down into that trunk as well. That will help in a minute when I go over that. Let's mix up some more of this dark shadow colour here. Bring these areas down. Leave a few of these areas, that just suggests gaps between the trees. It looks quite nice. A little bit more shadow in here, I think. And just as that's drying, I'm going to suggest a few trunks. I've got a nice sticky mix of burnt umber and cobalt blue. And that's just enough to pick out a little bit of detail, suggest some trees in this copse that's in the middle distance here. And then I'm going to do exactly the same thing with these trees over here too. Let's suggest them in with the side of the brush. Again, keep changing those colours up. You don't want it all nice and uniform. That never looks good in a watercolour painting. It's coming down quite close to the top of the field there, that one, so it seems to be lying over the other side. And again, while this is all wet, I'm just going to drop in some darker areas for tree trunks. Same colour, cobalt and burnt umber. I'll extend a couple of these up into the tree as well. That always looks nice. No more than that. These are middle distance trees. We don't want to get bogged down with a lot of detail here. All I'm trying to do is approach this area instinctively and vary the colours to give some visual interest, ensure that I've got some broken edges in there, drop some darker colours in as this is starting to dry up, and it's perfect for rendering middle distance areas of trees, fields, hills, and that type of thing in a landscape. Okay, so it's time to put in the field, and what I want to do here is leave some white of the paper for the fence, and I just need to make sure that I've got a nice bead here so I can tidy that up in a minute. That's important. I need to be able to go back to that. Again, vary the colours here. There's a bit of brown here as it runs underneath the tree where winter leaves have no doubt started to fall down. And as I said previously, I want to leave some areas of white here that will just suggest frost, and I can come back and glaze over the top of those and it will give me the effect that I want. So let's come back over here, make sure this is still workable, which it is. Come down very roughly over the top of this fence. Don't need to be too fastidious about it. Something like that. Plenty of frost through here. Leave a little gap for that rail there. And then I'm going to vary the brush strokes and suggest some foreground grass here. So paint in the direction that you want those to be growing. If they're growing up, change your brush strokes from horizontal to vertical, something like that, and then that gives us something to work with when I come back with a glaze. And then just as that's drying, you can always start to suggest in some areas of grass here. And this is a good way of painting foregrounds. You can look at the shapes that have developed on the paper. I'm not looking at the reference photo at all here. And I'm just reacting to what's happened, what's developed, and where I think it might just need a little bit of help, a little bit of tidying up. But this is by no means the finished article. There's plenty of techniques that we can use to adjust this in due course. And then just as this is drying up here, I can just drop on some darker areas of hedge and scrub that are sitting on the top of the hill, and it just allows those to blend down into the field, and it stops the top of that area being too obvious and too abrupt. It helps to provide a little extra texture in the field too, which is always quite nice. Right, now this is all dry, let's just put a glaze over the top. Put on some clear water. Don't want a hard edge where the glaze goes over the top of what's already there. So we can paint into that, and it's just a very pale blue shadow colour that is enough to take away the sharp brightness of the white of the paper, which I don't really want there. And it creates a sense of shade and helps to indicate frost just lying on the ground. While that's still wet, I'm going to make it darker in some of the foreground areas here. And then a few darker marks here with some nice sludgy green mix, which really helps to add some depth into the painting as we're starting to build up some stronger tones here in the foreground. But when you're doing this, don't overdo it, And also make sure you leave some of what you've painted showing through, because that all adds to the suggested detail and the texture that you get in the foreground. And as this is starting to dry, I'm just adding a few more little marks here. Just suggests detail, undulations in the field, areas of broken grass, that type of thing. Right, let's start to put in the main tree. I've got two washes here. One is a cooler version, one's a warmer version. Just two colours, burnt umber and cobalt blue, and of course the cooler version has more blue in it. What I like to do here is pick a main limb of the tree, so we've got this one here for example, and with a size 6 brush I'm just going to put most of that in. And what I want is for this bottom edge here to be kept wet, so I'll keep an eye on that. And then it's over to the rigger to paint the smaller branches and give that lovely sense of tapering that you get on tree branches. And now that I'm into this part of the painting, I'm not really looking at the reference image. I'm just relying on my memory bank of the way oak trees grow and what they look like. And that's enough. And it just allows me to be more flexible and to respond to what's going on the paper. Now, because the board's on a slope and I'm loading more paint into this area of the tree, it's all going to keep running back down to this edge here. So I should be fine for a little while to carry on working with these small branches. Remember, trees are three-dimensional, so some of these branches are growing towards us in slightly unusual shapes that may seem odd, but it's not a simple 2D slice through the middle of the tree. Imagine these branches coming towards you. Push your rigger into the rough paper and allow it to spring out, and it gives you some wonderful shapes and marks on the paper that are not intentional necessarily, but you just see what's happening and they look great, and just work with them. It's perfect for trees. Now, what I wanted to do is ensure that these branches come in front of the trees behind it, because while we can talk a lot about different types of perspective and aerial, chromatic, linear, all that sort of stuff, having overlapping elements in a painting is perhaps the best way of creating a sense of distance. By putting these branches over those distant trees, it makes them look even further away. And they're over the edge of the hill. When objects overlap, it creates a sense of distance. Okay, so we've finished this area of the tree, and this is still wet, so I can keep working with that. So I'm going to go back to my other brush, mix up the colour a little bit. Let's go slightly lighter this time, and have it all merge into there. And then we can come up this main limb of the tree, back to the rigger, and I can continue using my technique that I like of pushing it into the paper, allowing the hairs to spring out and go where they want to go, really. All I'm trying to do here is really guide them roughly where I want, but to be flexible enough to respond to what's happening. Now I'm going to go back into the darker mix as well. Just gives us some variety. It stops the tree looking like a cardboard cutout, which we don't want. Let's pay some attention to this side of the tree. I'm keeping an eye on this area all the time, making sure that doesn't dry up on me, because if it does, then I've got to deploy a few tricks in order to make that come alive again, or to make the join look seamless, I should say. I'll be perfectly honest with you, this is one of the most enjoyable aspects of watercolour painting for me. I could sit here for hours on end fiddling around with this rigger, painting trees. And in Sussex, where I live, there's an abundance of, well, not just oak trees, you've got all manner of different varieties, and it is the perfect county for the tree painter. Now I'm just going to keep moving this down, because now what I want to do is go into a warmer colour. So I want to keep this area wet and on the move, and I'm going into this warmer mix on this side of the tree, using the larger number 6 to block in this large bough that comes up through the middle of the tree. And the reason I'm changing the colour up here, albeit very slightly, is that there's just more glow on this side of the tree. The sun is setting over here, and even though the tree is largely silhouetted, this area is just catching a little bit more of the light. And for winter trees like this, I prefer to put in the vast majority of the branches in the structure first, establish that, and then I can use another technique to come back over the top and put in a suggestion of the mass of smaller branches that you get at the edge of the tree, residual leaves, acorns, that type of thing. Let's put a little bit of dark into there, keep that wet and moving. Here's another of our branches that are growing towards us. Very important to get these in to give your trees that sense of 3 dimensions. I'm going to come back into here. It's just about wet enough to allow me to do that, and put in a branch that I missed. It's not that important, but it just helps to close this gap up here in the middle of the tree. Okay, that's good. And then all I need to do really is just finish off the trunk. So this is still wet. When you paint trees this way, you need to make sure there's plenty of paint on the brush, because it allows you to make the marks at the extremities of the branches. But the wet paint that you're painting into also takes some moisture and paint out of the brush and just contributes to this pool that's forming at the bottom, which means you can just go back to it and finish up. That's largely the shape I want. I'm just going to allow it to dry up a little bit before I merge it into the landscape itself. I think I'll put a little branch growing up out of here. There's often small saplings and things like that that attempt to get underway in the same location, so I will suggest that there too. Okay, that should be dry enough now, with a warmish mix of the brown, which suggests fallen leaves. I'm just going to run underneath that trunk and allow it to settle down into the landscape. There's no real shadow here because the sun has sunk behind these trees, and so while you can usually use a nice shadow there to connect the two together, I can't do that here, but we'll just use an area of dry brush, which is fallen leaves and twigs and what have you. Just allows that to ground itself in the landscape as opposed to looking as if it's just been stuck on. And it's important to do that with trees because that is where they've come from. They have grown up out of the landscape. Now that that's started to dry, I can just give some definition to the fence posts here. And again, I'll do that with my rigger. And the key is not to be too prescriptive here. You don't want to spell everything out. And just making a few marks like this helps to define the fence, which is a nice chestnut post and rail fence. You see them all over the place in the countryside in Sussex and Kent. Some of the home counties too. You don't want to be too fussy with this. Just a few marks here and there helps to give the fence some definition. Same again on this side. I should probably be using a slightly larger brush, but I can't actually be bothered to change it at the minute. Don't finish off the bottom of your fence posts, just leave them like that, because there's always grass growing around them, and again, if you put a crisp edge or some definition there, then it just looks like they've been stuck onto the landscape, and of course that's never the case. Okay, so it's time to put in some of these smaller branches and give the tree a bit more body. And all I'm going to be doing is suggesting that with some dry brushing and some broken brush strokes. It is simply suggestion, it's no more than that. And the key here is to have a reasonable amount of paint on the brush. Funnily enough, it's not as dry a brush as you think. And then just hold it horizontal to the paper and come back down some of these branches. I'm starting with a warm colour here. And then what I like to do is to have a damp brush that I can use just to break up some of the uniformity of this. Even though it's a broken edge, it's just nice to have some areas that are soft, some areas that are crisp and well defined. Now I'm going to go into my darker colour and come over this side of the tree. Again, paint back down the branches. And you have to be delicate when you do this. Too heavy and you will start to scrub and loosen some of this dark paint that you've put on earlier with the branches. Make sure there's plenty of this in the middle of the tree because branches are growing towards us. Okay, let's get into that again with the damp brush. Soften some areas, leave some nice and crisp. Just creates variety. I'm warming this up as I come down to these lower branches because there's quite a nice collection of leaves that are hanging around these lower branches. And I just want there to be a sense that they're there and catching the light. Back to the darker colour and we'll come back up these branches. Always do this, paint back down the branches. You may need a little more in there. Make sure you don't overdo this. Be decisive and dynamic with your brush strokes and don't fiddle around too much. It's simply a case now of just finishing off with a few details. I think I'm going to put a little bit of colour just along the top of the fence there. It just helps to define it and make it stand out a little bit better. Then with the rigger brush I'll just define some of the fence posts as well, just to put a little extra detail in there. Try not to get too carried away with this. All we're trying to do is just give the painting a little bit of zip in certain areas And this type of thing helps. Inevitably at this time of year there's always a few boughs and branches that have fallen down, so a suggestion of that is quite a good idea. Maybe some over here too. And then I'll define a couple of trees in this area at the back, and it just contrasts nicely with the softer ones that I've suggested. It just gives some depth to that area of woodland, that little copse that's in the middle distance. Again, not too much. This tree appears to be floating in midair, so let's just tweak that. And then over here I'll put in just the faintest suggestion of some branches and trunks. This is where it's important to understand the delicate nature of watercolour and how to achieve that watercolour look. It's no good getting busy with the rigour and your dark tone and putting details in and think, oh, of course I can do it over here. I'm doing the same thing, but by using a far paler tone, it allows me to put detail in, but I'm not ruining the sense of depth in the painting. It's still there. I might suggest just a few cracks in the bark on the oak tree here. It just helps to break up the monotony of that large dark shape there. But again, not too much. It's a nice idea to finish off with a few foreground grasses as well. Again, this is helping to create a sense of depth. We know this is grass, but it's quite a large element here, and it's just helping to push everything back. Just a few bits of detail over this side. And there we are. I think we're done. There's a nice winter glow to the sky. I'm pleased with that. By keeping the middle distance area of woodland and the main tree quite dark, it's helped the sky to shine. Leaving some white paper in my initial wash for the field was very useful, because when I glazed over it again with that pale blue shadow colour, it gives the sense of frost, which has been giving it that nice festive winter feel. And I'm pleased with it. I haven't gone too overboard with the detail, just a little suggestion here of the fence and some of these longer grasses in the foreground. But it really is all about the winter atmosphere. It was about being there on the Board Hill estate and capturing that moment and allowing this magnificent oak tree to take centre stage.